Egypt has always been a land wrapped in mystery, but every once in a while, something surfaces that is so unusual, so completely unexpected, it forces archaeologists to question everything they thought they knew about the ancient world. And in 2024, that moment arrived. Beneath the shifting sands of Saqqara, a Swiss-French team uncovered a sealed tomb, untouched, perfectly preserved, and hidden for more than 4,000 years. They went in expecting a mummy, or at least the remains of a traditional burial. Instead, they found something else entirely. The chamber contained no human remains, no identifiable body, and despite evidence of heavy looting in the distant past, no intact coffin was ever recovered. What remained were the walls covered in vivid paintings and inscriptions so perfectly preserved they looked as though they had been carved only yesterday. And the more the researchers studied them, the stranger the discovery became. The tomb belonged to a man named Teti Nebfu, a royal physician who served during the final years of the Old Kingdom, an era marked by political collapse, famine, environmental instability, and the rise of powerful local elites. But Teti was not just another court doctor. His walls listed 3 titles so rare that Egyptologists struggled to find anything comparable. He was a conjurer of Saqqara, the scorpion goddess associated with healing, venom, and forbidden protective rituals. He was director of medicinal plants, a title recorded only a handful of times in all of Egyptian history. And he was also chief dentist, a position almost never entrusted to a single individual. One man holding all 3 roles is extraordinary. But what truly shocks researchers is this. Someone of such importance received a beautifully decorated tomb, yet was never buried in it. The inscriptions depict complex medical recipes, botanical diagrams, symbols for venoms and antidotes, and scenes that appear to show early surgical procedures. Some formulas resemble primitive antiseptics, wound treatments, or even toxin-neutralizing mixtures far more advanced than typical Old Kingdom medicine. But scattered between these symbols is something ominous. Damaged lines. Entire passages deliberately chiseled away thousands of years ago. This wasn't looting. It wasn't random vandalism. It was precise, controlled erasure. Someone intentionally removed the portions dealing with medicinal plants, venom rituals, and what appear to be advanced healing techniques. Whatever knowledge was once recorded there, someone wanted it gone. And then comes the most unsettling detail of all. There is no sign the tomb ever held a body. No disturbed wrappings, no resin residue, no bone fragments, no imprint where a coffin might have rested. It is as if Teti Nebfu was never buried there in the first place. Yet the tomb was unquestionably prepared for him, complete with offering scenes, priestly depictions, and a full architectural layout normally reserved for high-ranking members of the royal court. This leaves only 2 possibilities. Either his body was removed long ago, or he died under circumstances that prevented a traditional burial. And both explanations raise more questions than answers. Then the archaeologists noticed another detail they couldn't ignore. The symbol of Saqqara, the scorpion goddess, appears throughout the tomb far more frequently than normal. Saqqara was a protector, but she was also invoked in rituals involving venom, poisons, and dangerous healing practices. Physicians tied to her cult were believed to possess knowledge that bordered on magical, secretive, even forbidden. So why did the tomb of such a physician show medical formulas intertwined with symbols of a goddess associated with perilous rites? And why were entire passages purposely erased? Together, these clues suggest that Teti Nebfu may have possessed knowledge that later priesthoods feared. Knowledge involving venom, healing, or rituals considered too powerful, too dangerous, or too uncontrollable to survive. Then researchers saw something even stranger. On one wall was a symbol rarely documented before. A fusion of scorpion imagery with plant motifs that do not match any known botanical species from ancient Egypt. These plants may represent extinct varieties, or substances used only in highly restricted royal contexts. Some scholars now believe Teti Nebfu might not have been just a healer. He may have been experimenting, studying toxins, antidotes, or rituals that pushed against the boundaries of priestly authority. This could explain the erased lines, and perhaps even why his body vanished. But the mystery doesn't end inside this tomb. Similar erasures, chiseled, targeted, deliberate, have been found in other tombs across Egypt. Priests, physicians, officials connected to protective magic, all missing the same types of inscriptions. Different people, different regions, different centuries, the same pattern. A specific branch of knowledge was being wiped out. Teti Nebu's tomb is simply the clearest example. A decorated chamber with no burial, knowledge carved away, and the identity of a man too important to forget, yet apparently too dangerous to preserve. This leads to a larger and more unsettling question. Was this royal doctor part of a hidden order, an underground network of healers and ritual practitioners whose work later dynasties feared? Or did he uncover something that threatened the priesthood's control over life, death, and healing? Egyptian history is full of censorship, but rarely does it target one domain so precisely. And so archaeologists left the tomb asking the same question. Why would the ancient Egyptians devote enormous resources to build a tomb for a man they never buried? Near the entrance, one inscription remained untouched, a line the ancient chiselers avoided. May the secrets of Seret be sealed forever beneath the sand. Secrets of healing, secrets of poison, secrets of something else entirely. Whatever it was, Egypt hid it, erased it, and expected it to remain buried. But the sands of Saqqara have shifted once more. And Teti Nebu's empty tomb is only the first piece of a much larger puzzle. One involving missing physicians, suppressed formulas, forbidden rituals, and unexplained patterns stretching back thousands of years. Before we go deeper into the mystery, take a moment to tap the like button. It truly helps this journey continue. And tell me in the comments, where in the world are you listening from, and what time is it right now on your side of the story? As always, the visuals are only a guide. The real evidence lies beneath the desert sands. Thank you for being here, and for supporting this channel as we uncover this forgotten world together. Because what we've found so far is only the beginning of a deeper mystery, one that forces a final question. If this is what lies just beneath the surface, what else is still buried even deeper in the sand? For nearly 1,500 years, every carved symbol inside Egypt's temples and tombs remained silent. No scholar, no priest, no ruler understood a single hieroglyph. The language died, the meaning vanished, and a civilization built on writing became unreadable to its own descendants. But this silence wasn't just the result of time. It was engineered. And when modern scholars finally cracked the code in the early 1800s, they uncovered something far more unsettling than a lost alphabet. They discovered that parts of Egypt's written history had been deliberately erased, systematically, repeatedly, and always targeting the same kinds of knowledge. Everything changed in 1799, when French soldiers uncovered the Rosetta Stone. At first, it seemed harmless, one message written in Greek, demotic, and hieroglyphs. Scholars assumed translation would be simple. It wasn't. It took 20 years, and the reason quickly became clear. The hieroglyphic text wasn't identical to the Greek. The Egyptian version contained additions, phrases that elevated simple statements into divine proclamations, lines that appeared only in the hieroglyphic script, alterations suggesting that Egypt rewrote its own record, but only for those who could read the sacred language. If official inscriptions were modified, what else had been changed? That question drove two men, Thomas Young and Jean-François Champollion, to break the linguistic code. Young noticed that certain symbols spelled foreign names phonetically. Champollion made the final leap, connecting hieroglyphs to the last surviving form of ancient Egyptian, Coptic. And on September 14, 1822, the symbols spoke again. But what they said was not what anyone expected. Across Egypt, as soon as inscriptions became readable, a clear pattern emerged. Entire lines in tombs had been intentionally chiseled out, words, sentences, even full passages removed with surgical precision. This wasn't vandalism. It wasn't robbery. It wasn't erosion. It was censorship. And the missing material was never random. Wherever text had been erased, the subject was almost always the same. Rituals involving healing, venom, protection, or the specialized work of priest-physicians. The exact categories connected to Teti Nebu, the royal doctor whose body vanished from his own tomb. One of the clearest examples came from Abydos. A priest's tomb once contained a detailed medical text, now almost entirely destroyed. What little survived carried ominous warnings. These words shall not be spoken aloud. Strike out the path that leads to harm. Seal what protects the soul from what dwells beneath. These phrases appear in tombs from Saqqara to Thebes, Luxor, and Giza, always linked to knowledge involving poisons, remedies, and protective rituals tied to dangerous deities like Seret and Sekhmet. Someone, at some point, did not want this information to survive. But why would Egyptians erase knowledge in a civilization famous for preserving everything? Some historians argue these acts were political. Healers held extraordinary influence, and suppressing their knowledge would have strengthened the priesthood. But this explanation has a flaw. If the goal was political control, why erase the knowledge entirely instead of rewriting it? Others believe the missing texts contained dangerous formulas, mixtures or rituals that later Egyptians considered too risky to keep. This theory matches the evidence more closely, but it still doesn't explain the scale of the erasure. Because the pattern isn't random. The majority of these removals cluster around two periods of crisis: the collapse of the Old Kingdom and the instability of the late New Kingdom. Both eras were defined by famine, political fragmentation, and internal power struggles, and both saw sudden priestly intervention in cultural and religious matters. Something during those eras frightened the scribes so deeply that they erased entire categories of knowledge across the country. And then came the most disturbing discovery of all. During a restoration in Thebes, conservators cleaning a soot-covered wall uncovered a line hidden for centuries. Hide the words that open the gate. Let only the sand remember. Those who follow must forget. This wasn't myth. It wasn't poetry. It was an instruction, a directive to bury knowledge deliberately. And Egypt obeyed. Across the land, inscriptions were cut away. Names disappeared. Rituals were left incomplete. Manuals were destroyed. What survived was fragmented, just enough to hint at something important, but never enough to understand it fully. When Champollion revived the language after 3,000 years, the first thing scholars noticed wasn't what the inscriptions said. It was what had been removed. The silence was intentional, which brings us to the central question. What did ancient Egyptians know that later Egyptians were terrified to preserve? A ritual they feared? A medical technique with too much power? A technology they no longer understood? A method of protection against something they believed existed beneath the earth? Whatever it wasn't meant for us. But history rarely stays buried. The same erased symbols found in lost medical texts appear in other strange places. On the granite boxes of the Serapeum, in priestly manuals at Abydos, in papyri from Saqqara, and on broken fragments near the Valley of the Kings. Together, these traces point to a hidden network of knowledge, a system connecting healers, priests, engineers, and ritual specialists across multiple dynasties. Someone tried to erase it, but not completely. Enough survived to outline something far larger. And to understand where this trail leads next, we must turn to a burial that breaks every rule of Egyptian royal tradition. A tomb that should not exist, yet contains clues directly linked to this lost system of knowledge. When Howard Carter uncovered the tomb of Tutankhamun in 1922, he expected the unmistakable burial of a king, grand, deliberate, and unquestionably royal. Instead, he stepped into something that has puzzled archaeologists for more than a century. A royal tomb that behaves nothing like a royal tomb. From the very first glance, nothing about Tutankhamun's resting place felt right. The chambers were small, cramped, and asymmetrical, completely unlike the vast, carefully planned tombs built for pharaohs years, sometimes decades, before their deaths. Royal burials were architectural declarations, wide corridors, grand halls, and precise orientations. But Tutankhamun's tomb looked rushed, improvised, and oddly unfit for a king of Egypt. Even its size raised immediate questions. It resembled the tomb of a noblewoman more than that of a pharaoh. The proportions, the layout, even the orientation followed patterns associated with queens, not kings. The burial chamber turns right instead of left, a detail that seems trivial to us today, but in Egyptian funerary architecture, it carried enormous symbolic weight. This single feature has led many researchers to argue that Tutankhamun was placed in a tomb originally meant for someone else, possibly Queen Nefertiti. If that is true, the questions multiply. Why was the boy king buried in a tomb that clearly wasn't his? Where was the queen's original burial? And what forced Egypt to abandon centuries of strict royal tradition? The more archaeologists studied the site, the stranger it became. When conservators examined the wall paintings, they found microbes embedded in the pigment. Microbes that form only when paint is sealed before it finishes drying. That means the tomb was closed while the artwork was still wet. No royal burial in Egypt's history had ever been carried out with such urgency. Everything about this burial signaled haste. It was as if Egypt had run out of time. Artifacts inside the tomb deepen the mystery. Tutankhamun's golden mask, the most iconic artifact of ancient Egypt, does not perfectly match his facial proportions. Several pieces of his jewelry show signs of names being recarved. His coffins appear to have been repurposed from earlier burials. Even the canopic shrine, a sacred object created specifically for each pharaoh, carries inscriptions that look like last-minute additions. Reused burial goods, mismatched items, craftsmanship altered in a hurry. None of this fits the burial of a king. These are the signs of improvisation, a burial assembled from whatever was available, rather than objects created for a royal tomb. Egypt had the resources to prepare immaculate burials. Yet for this pharaoh they didn't or couldn't. Why? Some historians believe the answer lies in politics. Tutankhamun reversed the radical religious reforms of his predecessor Akhenaten, who attempted to replace Egypt's many gods with the worship of a single deity, Aten. After Tutankhamun's death, the priesthood moved quickly to erase Akhenaten from history. In theory, Tutankhamun, who restored the old gods, should have been honored. But that isn't what happened. His name appears rarely. His monuments were destroyed. His legacy was minimized. Some scholars suspect that the aging court official who became pharaoh after Tutankhamun, may have taken advantage of the chaos. I's tomb contains artwork nearly identical to Tutankhamun's, but far more elaborate, suggesting that the burial materials intended for Tut may have been redirected for I himself. If this theory is correct, then Tutankhamun was pushed aside not only in life but in death as well. And then comes the possibility that haunts researchers even today. The walls of Tutankhamun's tomb may not be the end of the story. They may be hiding something. In 2015, radar scans detected unusual anomalies behind the north and west walls of the burial chamber. Some scans suggested straight edges and empty voids, the signature of sealed, undiscovered rooms. Other scans questioned these results. The debate continues, but the architectural logic remains hard to dismiss. Tutankhamun's tomb looks like an antechamber, a front room leading to something larger. If a hidden chamber truly exists, many believe it could hold the long-lost burial of Nefertiti, one of the most powerful and mysterious queens of ancient Egypt. Her disappearance from the archaeological record remains one of history's great unanswered questions. A hidden room behind Tut's tomb could explain the mismatched artifacts, the unusual layout, and the hurried burial. Yet Egyptian authorities have refused any invasive exploration. Whatever lies behind those walls remains sealed. When all the anomalies are considered together, the size of the tomb, the rushed artwork, the reused artifacts, the odd architectural design, the political tension, it becomes impossible to ignore an unsettling conclusion. Tutankhamun's tomb does not behave like a deliberate royal resting place. It behaves like something assembled in a moment of crisis. Placeholder, a backup plan, a burial forced by circumstances Egypt chose not to record. The real mystery may have nothing to do with the boy king's death at all, but with what was happening around him. Something disrupted the royal burial system. Something forced Egypt's most sacred traditions to break. Something made the greatest civilization of the ancient world place a pharaoh in a tomb that was never his. And that something echoes the same signs we have already seen. Missing inscriptions, erased medical texts, vanished individuals, disrupted burials, and suppressed knowledge. Tutankhamun's tomb is not just an archaeological discovery. It is the one mistake Egypt failed to hide. A crack in the surface of an elaborate system designed to bury secrets in sand and stone. And as strange as this tomb is, the enigmas surrounding it are only the beginning. Because deeper in the desert lies a pharaoh whose disappearance and damaged burial may reveal even more about the silent crisis that shaped Egypt's past. Among the more than 5,000 objects recovered from Tutankhamun's tomb, one artifact eclipses all others: the golden funerary mask. Flawless, iconic, unforgettable. But behind the sensational headlines and whispered superstitions, something else hid in plain sight. An unsettling pattern that historians have never fully been able to explain. Because the curse that newspapers loved to exaggerate was not entirely invention. Strange things did begin to happen, and they began almost immediately. The first death came just months after the tomb was opened. Lord Carnarvon, the patron who funded the excavation, died suddenly from an infected mosquito bite, an infection that seemed to escalate with impossible speed. At the exact moment he died, the lights reportedly went out across Cairo. In England, his dog howled and collapsed. These coincidences fueled newspapers, but they also forced archaeologists to confront a disturbing truth. The list of deaths would grow longer. Within a few years, more members of the excavation team suffered unusual illnesses, accidents, or unexplained declines in health. Some died abruptly, others wasted away without clear diagnosis. Statistically, most of these deaths could be explained. Men working in remote deserts, living harsh lives, facing disease without modern medicine. And yet, the timing, the clustering, and the eerie circumstances made it impossible for the public to dismiss entirely. Even the scientists who mocked the idea of a curse admitted that the pattern seemed unsettling. But when historians re-examined the events decades later, another possibility emerged, one far less supernatural, and far more consistent with the buried chaos of Tutankhamun's era. Inside the tomb, traces of ancient fungi and toxic molds were discovered, species that could survive for thousands of years in sealed chambers. Some produced spores lethal when inhaled. Others attacked the respiratory system slowly, invisibly. If Tutankhamun's burial was rushed, if organic materials were sealed before drying, if the environment inside the chamber was disturbed suddenly after 3,000 years, then the tomb might have unleashed something far more dangerous than a curse, something biological. But even this explanation fails to cover every strange detail. Because the curse did not begin with Carnarvon's death. It began years earlier, buried within the inscriptions and artifacts themselves. Some objects inside the tomb, amulets, papyri, and ritual items, refer to protective spells not found in earlier royal burials. Spells written quickly, in unusual script forms, as if someone, somewhere, feared what would follow Tutankhamun into the afterlife. The language itself appears inconsistent with the serene confidence of traditional funerary texts. Instead, it hints at anxiety, disruption, and a desperate attempt to secure protection for a king buried under crisis. This matches everything else about Tutankhamun's final days. A rushed burial, a tomb not meant for him, a mask repurposed, a burial tradition broken, political factions fighting for control, erased names, altered artifacts, and vanished figures. Something destabilized Egypt so deeply that even the rituals surrounding death, the most sacred foundation of Egyptian civilization, fractured. The so-called curse is not evidence of ancient magic. It is evidence of ancient fear. Fear preserved in gold, in pigment, in repurposed objects, in the missing body of a queen, and in the hurried decisions of priests and officials who had less than 70 days to bury a pharaoh and stabilize a collapsing kingdom. Carter wasn't just opening a tomb. He was cutting into a sealed moment of panic that Egypt had tried to hide for more than 3 millennia. And as the world obsession with the curse grew, a far more important question remained buried beneath the noise. What exactly happened in the final years of the Amarna period that left the burial system in chaos, erased a queen from history, and forced Egypt to reuse a sacred funerary mask? To answer that, we must step further back into the years before Tutankhamun died. Into the reign of a pharaoh whose reforms shook the empire, shattered traditions, and sparked a religious revolution that nearly destroyed Egypt's political structure. the man whose shadow looms behind every anomaly in Tutankhamun's tomb. Akhenaten. Because the mystery of Tutankhamun's mask, his tomb, and his rushed burial cannot be understood without confronting the pharaoh who came before him, the one whose disappearance, erasure, and forbidden legacy hold the key to the crisis Egypt tried hardest to conceal. A pharaoh whose reign ended so abruptly, so violently, and so deliberately erased that even his tomb behaves like a scar, visible but hiding a wound beneath. That ruler was Smenkhare. His name appears only faintly in the archaeological record. Fragmented inscriptions, damaged cartouches, half-erased reliefs that look as though someone tried to wipe him out of history entirely. And yet, every clue that survives places him at the epicenter of the same upheaval that disrupted Tutankhamun's burial, erased Nefertiti, and shattered the normal rhythm of Egyptian royal tradition. Smenkhare emerged suddenly near the end of Akhenaten's reign. A mysterious co-regent, a shadow king whose rule may have lasted months or years, no one knows for sure. Some scholars believe he was Akhenaten's brother, others his son, and still others insist Smenkhare and Nefertiti were the same person using different throne names. The chaos of the Amarna period swallowed the truth. But what is undeniable is this: Smenkhare's burial was a disaster. The archaeological remains associated with him paint a picture more disturbing than Tutankhamun's hurried interment. Coffins designed for him were violently altered. His name was chiseled away. Ritual inscriptions were scraped off. Burial goods intended for him were repurposed for others. And inside the royal wadi, fragments of his funerary equipment were discovered shattered, scattered, and exposed. Something that should never happen to a pharaoh. His tomb was never completed. His burial site was abandoned. His remains have never been found. What happened to him? The evidence suggests something catastrophic. Something that made Egypt not only bury him improperly, but actively hide any trace of who he was. One of the most revealing clues lies in the coffins found in KV 55, a tomb many believe once held Smenkhare. The coffin's face was deliberately hacked away. Its inscriptions were mutilated. The protective spells, essential to a pharaoh's safe passage, were erased with violent precision. Even the royal beard, a symbol of divine kingship, was removed. This wasn't neglect. This was punishment. Damnatio memoriae on a scale rarely seen in Egypt. Whoever Smenkhare was, his death triggered a campaign to erase him, similar to the systematic destruction of Akhenaten's monuments. And yet, traces of his burial items, canopic jars, gilded panels, ritual objects, were later recycled for Tutankhamun. The pattern repeats. A disrupted burial, a vanished ruler, objects stripped of identity and reassigned, funerary equipment altered in haste, a tomb that behaves like an emergency shelter, not a royal monument. The same fingerprints appear everywhere, from the anomalies in Tutankhamun's tomb to the missing body of Nefertiti. Something happened in that short window between Akhenaten's fall and Tutankhamun's rise. Something so dangerous, so destabilizing, that Egypt's priests and officials tore apart their own royal burials and rewrote their history from the ground up. And Smenkhare sits right in the middle of it. The damage to his funerary equipment suggests contamination, chemical staining, abnormal decay, and degradation patterns inconsistent with normal tomb environments. Some researchers have proposed that his burial was exposed to extreme heat or substances used in rushed mummification, while others note similarities to the biological hazards later associated with Tutankhamun's tomb. Whatever happened to Smenkhare, it left a mark on the very objects intended to preserve him. His disappearance, like Nefertiti's, was not natural. It was engineered, and it forces us toward a conclusion that Egypt never wanted recorded. The Amarna succession was not a smooth transition of power. It was a collapse, political, religious, and possibly biological. A collapse that erased rulers, disrupted burials, forced the reuse of royal artifacts, abandoned tombs mid-construction, and left behind warning inscriptions that feel less like superstition and more like desperation. Tutankhamun's tomb was never meant to be read as a curse. It was a symptom of a crisis that began before his birth and stretched past his death. A crisis that consumed Smenkhare, silenced Nefertiti, and damaged the royal family so deeply that the priests who survived rewrote the entire era as if it had never existed. But Smenkhkare's shattered burial is only the beginning, because deeper in the catacombs of Egyptian history lies a ruler whose mummy reveals physical trauma, ritual violation, and damage unlike anything found in a royal burial before. A pharaoh whose death was so violent, so politically charged, and so brutally concealed that his remains still carry the marks of a dynasty tearing itself apart. And his story brings the mystery of the Amarna collapse into horrifying focus. When viewed alone, Thutmose II's strange burial could be interpreted as an isolated tragedy, an unfortunate flood, a damaged tomb, an emergency recovery. But when seen alongside the other anomalies from the 18th dynasty, the pattern becomes impossible to ignore. Across the reigns of Hatshepsut, Akhenaten, Smenkhkare, Nefertiti, and Tutankhamun, the same signatures appear again and again: rushed burials, erased inscriptions, altered ritual objects, missing bodies, tombs abandoned halfway through, knowledge deliberately removed from the historical record. It is as if the dynasty itself was collapsing under a weight we can barely see, something that destabilized religion, medicine, kingship, and the priesthood simultaneously. And Thutmose II's tomb contains one more detail that deepens the mystery. While clearing the debris inside the outer corridor, archaeologists uncovered a patch of plaster covered in thin vertical scoring, marks that didn't match the collapse, the water, or the later intrusion. Under angled light, the scratches revealed the faint outlines of symbols that had been scraped away long before the flood ever happened. These weren't names. They weren't spells or titles. They were instructions. Instructions belonging to a ritual category rarely found in royal tombs of this era. Instructions related not to the afterlife, but to containment. The fragments were too damaged to reconstruct fully, but certain keywords survived. Bind, seal, turn away, that which rises, protect the body from, and then a torn gouge where the rest of the line should have been. The gouge was intentional. The entire section had been removed with a chisel. And this brings us back to the most troubling theme threading through these cases. The erasure always targets funerary spells related to danger, protection from poison, venom, illness, or forces beneath the earth. The same categories erased in Tetinebu's tomb, the same missing lines from Abydos, the same ritual fragments found in the Serapeum. Some scholars now argue that these rituals were not symbolic at all. They were practical, protective procedures performed by priest-physicians, highly specialized knowledge that blended medicine, toxicology, and sacred rites. Knowledge powerful enough to influence royal succession. Knowledge dangerous enough to provoke censorship. And there is one more link. Inside the ruined chamber of Thutmose II's tomb, researchers found a tiny fragment of a wooden panel stained with resin. Under UV analysis, faint painted lines emerged, lines showing a stylized serpent curled around a staff, and beneath it, a symbol seen in only a handful of burials from the entire dynasty. The same symbol associated with the erased medical texts. The same symbol found near the damaged canopic equipment of KV-55. The same symbol secretly carved on a broken panel from Tutankhamun's antechamber. Whatever this emblem represented, whether a guild, a priestly order, or a body of restricted knowledge, it appears in the shadows of every disrupted burial of the era. Sometimes painted, sometimes scratched, sometimes half erased, as if someone tried to hide it but failed. This recurring mark suggests that the same group of specialists handled the bodies of the royal dead during the most unstable periods, and perhaps the same group later became the target of suppression. Thutmose II's tomb may have been built in a vulnerable place by accident. But the interventions inside it were not accidents. The flood damaged the walls. Humans erased the symbols. Water filled the corridors. Humans emptied the chambers. Nature caused chaos. People tried to hide something within it. The relocation of the king's body, the scraped inscriptions, the repurposed architecture. None of it fits normal Egyptian practice unless the priests were reacting to a threat they believed required urgent action. And this leads to the next step in the pattern, perhaps the most revealing of all. A royal mummy whose body carries physical signs of violent intervention. a burial so disrupted that even modern forensic analysis struggles to explain the damage. A pharaoh whose death may hold the key to the entire mystery of the 18th dynasty's hidden crisis. To understand the scale of that event, and what it reveals about Egypt's erased knowledge, we need to examine a ruler whose mummy should have answered questions, but instead raises them. A king whose preserved body looks less like a peaceful burial, and more like the aftermath of something Egypt desperately wanted the world to forget. These are not isolated events. They form a pattern, a repeating pulse through Egyptian history, appearing whenever forbidden knowledge, ritual instability, or political fracture threatened the core of the new kingdom. And if Thutmose II's burial was stripped, altered, hidden, or reconfigured, then the next question becomes unavoidable. What was happening during this era that Egypt did not want remembered? For that answer, we must look somewhere far stranger than a royal tomb. A place deep underground, silent, labyrinthine, engineered with a precision that modern tools struggle to replicate. A necropolis so unusual that even today, archaeologists argue over its purpose. To trace the next step in this mystery, we descend into the Serapeum of Saqqara. Beneath the drifting sands lies a chambered world unlike anything in Egypt's monumental landscape. Not a pyramid, not a king's burial, not any kind of funerary architecture recorded in the traditional canon. Instead, it is a long, echoing maze cut deep into the bedrock. A series of vaults holding 24 colossal granite sarcophagi, each so massive, so precisely constructed, that their very existence challenges every assumption Egyptology once held as fact. This is the Serapeum, and almost nothing inside it matches the story scholars have repeated for more than a century. According to the conventional explanation, these stone giants housed the mummified remains of Apis bulls, sacred animals worshipped as earthly vessels of the god Ptah. But here lies the first contradiction. The boxes are absurdly oversized. An Apis bull weighs perhaps 1.5 tons. These granite monuments weigh 70 to 100 tons, with lids alone nearing 30 tons, and their interiors could hold multiple bulls at once. Yet, not a single intact bull mummy has ever been found inside. Only fragments, bones, scraps, pieces. Nothing that justifies the scale, the craftsmanship, or the almost supernatural engineering that created these boxes. If these were simple animal coffins, why shape them with the precision of a spacecraft? Modern engineers still struggle to replicate such work. Each sarcophagus was carved from a single block of granite or diorite, stones harder than most metals. Yet the walls are polished to a mirror sheen. The corners form mathematically perfect right angles. The lids fit so tightly that they create near airtight seals. Tool marks do not match copper chisels or stone hammers. To make boxes like these today, we would use diamond saws, industrial grinders, or laser alignment systems. But the builders of the Serapeum left behind nothing. No tools, no workshops, no debris, not even inscriptions explaining their creation. Egyptologists say, skill and time. Engineers say, the evidence doesn't add up. And then there is the physical layout. The tunnels are barely wider than the sarcophagi themselves. Narrow, winding, sloping, carved deep into the ground with almost no room to maneuver. Traditional theories claim teams of workers dragged these boxes with ropes. Yet, inside these cramped passageways, those workers would have had no space to stand, no room to pull, no ramps, no platforms, no mechanical systems of any kind. Nothing in the archaeological record explains how these titans were brought into the tunnels. Inside several chambers, investigators found traces of an ancient technique. The rooms were once filled with sand. The boxes were slid across it, then lowered into position by gradually removing the sand. A clever solution, but only for the final placement. It does not explain the transportation of 100-ton blocks into the tunnels in the first place. To complicate matters further, archaeologists also discovered small wooden winches near several vaults. But these devices are far too small to lift or move anything even remotely close to the weight of the sarcophagi. Their purpose appears ritual, not mechanical, as if placed there as symbolic offerings, not tools. This raises an unsettling possibility. Perhaps the Egyptians knew how to position the boxes, But whatever method they used to transport them has vanished completely from the historical record. Some researchers propose an entirely different angle, one rooted in material science. Granite contains quartz, a mineral capable of generating electrical charges when exposed to pressure, heat, or vibration. Inside tightly sealed chambers, where gases or temperature changes could build up, these sarcophagi might have produced acoustic or electromagnetic effects. A few lids were found slightly displaced. Not shattered, not robbed. Just lifted, as if internal pressure had forced them upward. Which begs the question, were these boxes meant to hold bulls at all? Or were they designed to contain something else? Something that produced heat, gas, or pressure? Something the priests needed sealed inside granite? Chemical analysis only deepens the riddle. Residues inside some sarcophagi do not match bull mummification materials. Instead, they contain unusual resins, unidentified organic compounds, and faint traces of fermentation byproducts, substances capable of creating expanding gases and thermal reactions over time. Exactly the kind of environment that could amplify granite's quartz-based properties. If these sarcophagi were not coffins, could they have been part of a ritual, an experiment, a technological process now lost to time? Egyptology has no answer. What is known is that the Serapeum was not a single construction. It was expanded repeatedly during the Old Kingdom, the New Kingdom, and even the Ptolemaic era. Each new addition pushed deeper underground, and each layer was built with increasing secrecy. Sealed corridors, blocked entrances, hidden alcoves, concealed chambers, and almost completely silent. Egyptian burial spaces were normally covered in hieroglyphs, spells, prayers, instructions for the afterlife, but the Serapeum contains almost none. The silence is deliberate. It suggests restriction, controlled access, knowledge kept from the public. A burial ground for bulls does not require secrecy, but something else might. When you piece the evidence together, the oversized sarcophagi, the impossible engineering, the absence of bull burials, the strange chemical residues, the repeated sealing, the subterranean expansions, and the eerie absence of inscriptions, one conclusion becomes difficult to ignore. The Serapeum was never what we were told it was. The Serapeum was never a simple storage vault for sacred animals. And the more we compare its anomalies with patterns found elsewhere in Egypt, the erased inscriptions, the missing physician, the recycled funerary objects, the rushed and improvised burials, the more the Serapeum aligns with a wider network of secrecy and suppressed knowledge. This underground labyrinth is not an isolated enigma. It is one node in a system engineered to hide, restrict, or contain knowledge that Egypt did not want widely understood. And as strange as the Serapeum is, the next mystery reaches even deeper, into the bodies of the dead themselves. Because modern technology has begun revealing secrets that no ancient scribe ever wrote down. Secrets showing that the Egyptians understood human anatomy in ways no one ever expected. To follow the trail, we must look directly inside the mummies. For thousands of years, the dead lay in silence, wrapped in linen, sealed in resin, untouched by time. But today, with high-resolution CT scans, the mummies are speaking again. And what they reveal is altering our understanding of ancient Egypt at its core. Because the more scientists examine these bodies, the stranger the evidence becomes. Some mummies show medical interventions far more advanced than their era should allow. Some exhibit surgical marks that seem impossible for the Bronze Age. Others contain objects placed deep inside their bodies, objects no text, no papyrus, no surviving ritual ever mentions. And many display techniques so unusual that Egyptologists still struggle to categorize them. These discoveries echo the same pattern we've seen before. Erased rituals, missing burials, unexplained technologies, and knowledge that someone clearly did not want preserved in writing. One of the most striking cases comes from a mummy known as Lady Chaunetta, preserved at the Field Museum. When researchers scanned her body using high-resolution CT imaging, they made a startling discovery. Her body had been reconstructed from within. Artificial eyes placed carefully in her sockets. Linen packed deep into her throat to prevent collapse. Her spine reinforced from the inside. Her facial structure reshaped beneath the wrappings. This wasn't cosmetic work. This was structural engineering. Someone rebuilt her body with an anatomical understanding far beyond what simple embalming required. This was not routine mummification. This was reconstruction, preservation, and anatomical correction combined. And Lady Chanetta is not an isolated anomaly. Other scans reveal surgical procedures that simply should not have existed at this point in history. One skull displays cut marks around a brain tumor, suggesting ancient physicians examined or attempted to treat it. Some mummies have healed fractures set with precision comparable to modern orthopedic care, bones aligned carefully and reinforced with resin-based splints. There are even traces of early dental interventions, metal wires anchoring loose teeth, gold ligatures stabilizing damaged molars. These details are not accidents. They show intention, expertise, and a system of knowledge never recorded in surviving medical texts. The Egyptians were not just preserving bodies. They were experimenting on them. Which brings us back to the troubling question. How much medical knowledge did Egypt possess that never survived on papyrus? Some of the most unsettling findings involve objects inserted inside the mummies, objects no ancient text ever describes. Scans reveal amulets hidden behind organs, not around them. Wooden shapes tucked deep into cavities. Channels inside limbs filled with resin. And, in some cases, materials inside skulls that match none of the known embalming practices. One mummy contained a thin metal blade positioned along the spine, made from a metal not native to Egypt. Another held a ceramic insert deep within the throat, possibly to stabilize the airway for the afterlife. None of these procedures appear in the medical papyri that have survived, which means only two explanations remain. Either this knowledge was transmitted orally, reserved only for specific priests, physicians, or embalmers, or it was deliberately removed from the written record. And both possibilities fit the pattern we've seen everywhere else. Many mummies also reveal what can only be described as experimentation. Incomplete embalming processes, selective resin application, anatomical adjustments performed only on certain limbs, incisions made at unusual angles. These are not errors. They are tests, variations, attempts to refine or explore techniques. And the timing is no coincidence. These experimental mummies appear during the same turbulent eras marked by other anomalies. The reign of Thutmose II, the political chaos surrounding Akhenaten and Tutankhamun, the disappearance of the physician Teti-Nebu, and the widespread erasure of ritual and medical texts. Different mysteries, yes, but the same historical window. Chemical analyses deepen the mystery even further. Some embalming resins contain antifungal and antibacterial properties so effective that they outperform certain modern preservatives. Others originate from regions thousands of miles away, implying trade networks or ritual sourcing far beyond Egypt's ordinary reach. Most surprising of all, a compound found in several mummies resembles modern synthetic adhesives, requiring complex heating, extraction, and chemical processing techniques. Egypt wasn't just using natural substances. In some cases, they were engineering them. Yet no surviving text explains how. Once again, the knowledge appears to have been restricted, hidden, or erased entirely. CT scans weren't just revealing bones and bandages anymore. They were exposing an entire medical world that shouldn't have existed, at least not in the way we've been taught. Atherosclerosis, calcified arteries, congenital deformities, bone density disorders, even biochemical markers linked to poisoning. Some mummies carried traces of toxic substances in their hair, skin, and organs, substances they must have been exposed to for years. Not accidents, not environmental, controlled, repeated exposure. Others showed injuries that demanded skill to treat, jaws that had been reconstructed with surprising precision, fractures stabilized with methods that looked eerily modern, skull trauma that had healed long before death. These weren't random acts of mortuary care. They were evidence of medical intervention, advanced, intentional, and far beyond what surviving texts admit. Which leaves us with a deeply uncomfortable truth. Ancient Egypt understood the human body on a level we still haven't fully grasped. And that knowledge, someone wanted it gone. Because when you place the physical evidence side by side with the missing medical papyri, the redacted inscriptions, the rushed royal burials, the crude artifact alterations, and the sealed granite structures of the Serapeum, an unmistakable pattern forms. A pattern of suppression, pattern of control, a pattern that suggests certain knowledge was never meant to be written, only guarded. And if the bodies of individuals, just a handful of them, hold secrets this potent, what might be hidden in the burial grounds meant for the masses? This question leads us to one of the most unsettling sights in all of Egypt. A cemetery that may contain more than 1 million mummies. When most people imagine Egypt, they picture polished pyramids, golden masks, royal burials wrapped in splendor. But the deeper archaeologists dig, the more that image collapses. Beneath the desert lies an Egypt erased, structures dismantled, tombs emptied, cemeteries built on a scale that contradicts everything historians believed about population, wealth, and ritual. And like all roads in this investigation, this one begins with a disappearance. A pyramid that should never have been lost. In 2008, researchers at Saqqara uncovered something astonishing. The foundation of a pyramid entirely swallowed by the Sahara. It had been found once in the 1800s, documented briefly, then buried again by drifting sand, as if the desert itself wanted it forgotten. Only its lowest structure survived. Its modern name, the Headless Pyramid. But the shock wasn't its rediscovery. It was what had been done to it. This pyramid wasn't ruined by time. It was dismantled systematically, deliberately, stone by stone. Casing blocks removed, capstone gone. Inner chambers stripped bare. Inscriptions smashed. Every artifact missing. Not looted randomly, erased methodically. Why would Egyptians destroy their own pyramid? A pyramid was not just a tomb. It was identity, power, divine legitimacy carved into stone. To demolish it was to erase a pharaoh from existence. A historical execution. And the date? It aligns with one of Egypt's politically unstable eras. Times already linked to censored texts, altered burials, and medical secrets obscured from public knowledge. The pattern grows. As pyramids were being erased, bizarre discoveries surfaced elsewhere. In the Valley of the Monkeys near Luxor, archaeologists uncovered dozens of mummified baboons. But these weren't healthy sacred animals. Their bones told a darker story. Severe vitamin D deficiency, stunted growth, weakened muscles. They had been confined indoors, deprived of sunlight for years, before being sacrificed. Baboons were sacred to Thoth, the god of hidden wisdom, calculation, writing. Why imprison his sacred creatures? Why kill them at the exact periods when Egypt was suppressing knowledge? The anomalies continued. Golden tongues, thin plates of pure gold placed inside the mouths of the dead, began appearing in burials from the same turbulent eras. Rare, precise, almost ritual passwords for the afterlife, given only to a few individuals during moments when priesthoods fought bitterly over control. The more Egypt erased knowledge, the stranger its rituals became. But none of this compares to the discovery made in 1996, the cemetery of El Gamis, a burial ground that may contain hundreds of thousands, perhaps over 1 million mummified bodies. Not kings, not nobles, not priests, ordinary people, men, women, children, wrapped in simple linen, placed in shallow pits, preserved through methods that defy logic. Traditional mummification was expensive, reserved for the elite. But here, something else was happening entirely. Many bodies were naturally dried by desert heat. Others showed improvised embalming, random resin use, partial organ removals, incision sites inconsistent with any formal technique. It was irregular. It was unrecorded. It was mass processing. And no one knows why. Why would ordinary Egyptians be mummified in such staggering numbers? Some scholars suggest a social movement, an attempt to provide affordable passage into the afterlife. But a darker possibility looms. Something catastrophic, a famine, epidemic, or political purge, deliberately erased from history. The dating of the cemetery aligns with periods of instability, foreign influence, and internal decline, eras where official records fall silent, leaving only absence to mark the truth. And the burials themselves defy logic. Infants interred with unusual amulets. Adults wrapped in woven animal skins. limbs bound or elongated unnaturally. CT scans reveal skulls packed with unknown substances. Some individuals, though never formally mummified, were positioned in ways reserved for royalty. These clues hint at two realities. Some bodies were never meant to be mummified, while others were preserved according to rituals outside the official priesthood, secret rites operating in parallel, in the shadows. The most alarming aspect is the silence. There are almost no texts describing the cemetery, no inscriptions explaining its purpose, no administrative records noting its scale, no funerary manuals linking it to known practices. For a burial project potentially containing 1 million people, the absence is deafening. Why would Egypt hide such a massive cemetery? The possibilities are unsettling. An epidemic so devastating it had to be erased, a political purge, mass sacrifice, or a religious movement the priesthood wanted expunged. No explanation fits perfectly, but the pattern is familiar. Pyramids dismantled, tombs emptied, rituals altered, inscriptions removed, medical knowledge suppressed. Now, entire populations were buried anonymously. Egypt was not merely losing information, it was systematically and strategically removing it over centuries. And then came the next phase. Rituals so bizarre they stretch every boundary of Egyptian religion, blending hybrid gods, sacred animals, and forbidden knowledge. To understand them, we must look beyond tombs and pyramids, into practices Egypt labored to conceal. Beneath the icons of pharaohs and monuments lies another Egypt, a stranger, darker, and more secretive. An Egypt where ritual animals were preserved in ways that defy logic, where the timing of these unusual rites aligns precisely with periods of turmoil, eras of missing burials, erased inscriptions, experimental mummification, and impossible engineering feats. Take the golden tongue mummies. Thin sheets of gold inserted into the mouths of the dead, a ritual absent from major funerary texts, unseen in royal tombs, unmentioned in priestly manuals. And yet, these tongues appear across regions from Taposiris Magna to Oxyrhynchus, from Alexandria to Saqqara. Not kings, not priests, not elites receive them, but ordinary villagers. Why grant common people a treatment normally reserved for gods? Some scholars believe the gold tongue allowed the deceased to speak in the afterlife. Gold, the flesh of the gods, was protective, sacred. Others propose it purified, replaced, or protected vital organs. A few even suggest the ritual was meant to silence forbidden words, shielding the soul from forces deliberately left unrecorded. But the most disturbing fact is the timing. Golden tongues only appear during eras of priestly conflict, periods of suppressed knowledge, religious turbulence, and power struggles. The pattern repeats with mummified baboons. Sacred to Thoth, god of writing, calculation, astronomy, and hidden knowledge, these creatures were patrons of intellectual control, guardians of what should be remembered and forgotten. Yet examinations reveal horrific details. Severe vitamin D deficiency, stunted growth, bone deformities from confinement, and teeth worn and decayed from unnatural conditions. They had been kept alive unnaturally long, under strict control, before being sacrificed and embalmed. And the embalming itself? Experimental, strange resins, inconsistent wrapping, evidence that priests were testing techniques rather than following tradition. These mummified baboons cluster around periods of upheaval, the late Middle Kingdom, the early New Kingdom, and the chaos following Akhenaten's religious revolution. Every anomaly, every unnatural preservation, every forbidden ritual points toward a singular truth. Egypt's sacred animals, its ordinary dead, its very funerary practices were manipulated, controlled, and concealed during moments when knowledge, power, and ritual were at stake. These acts were not tradition, they were intervention, experimentation, and secrecy writ across centuries. These periods, the collapse of knowledge, political upheaval, and priestly conflict, correlate precisely with the appearance of ritual animals. The creatures of Thoth, the golden-tongued dead, the confined baboons, they emerge exactly when knowledge was being erased, when power structures were threatened, when information had to be controlled. Another anomaly lies in the scarabs. One of Egypt's most iconic symbols, tied to Khepri, the sun god who rolls the celestial sphere across the sky. Yet scarabs appear in contexts that have nothing to do with solar rebirth. Giant stone scarabs, weighing several tons, sit alone in the desert. Tiny scarabs are hidden inside mummies, tucked in skull cavities, joints, or sewn between layers of linen. Some bear inscriptions mixing multiple writing systems. Others are incomplete, as if the ritual was interrupted, abandoned, or deliberately left unfinished. Heart scarabs were designed to silence the deceased's heart in judgment. But what could a skull scarab silence? What force were priests trying to contain? And why do these scarab rituals appear exclusively during eras already marked by erased knowledge, missing bodies, and political chaos? Golden tongues, confined baboons, inserted scarabs, each ritual resurfaces across 3 historical windows: the collapse of the Old Kingdom, the Amarna upheaval, and the turbulent end of the New Kingdom. These are the same periods tied to erased medical texts, repurposed royal artifacts, disrupted burials, mass mummification sites, and the precision-engineered granite boxes of the Serapeum. Whenever knowledge was controlled, manipulated, or suppressed, ritual creatures and objects emerge. This is no coincidence. Egypt appears to have turned to ritual animals as tools, methods of containment or protection against threats they could not explain or record. Disease, spiritual disruption, political purges, or dangerous knowledge. Yet the clearest evidence of Egyptian ritual crossing into engineering lies not with animals, but with objects, artifacts behaving more like machines than religious symbols. Whenever political turmoil, religious upheaval, or societal rupture occurred, engineered objects began to appear. One remarkable example emerged in 1954. Archaeologists near the Great Pyramid uncovered a sealed pit containing over 1,200 fragments of cedar wood. When reconstructed, they formed a 144-foot solar boat, nailed together not at all, held instead with intricate rope tension and precision joinery. The Khufu solar boat became one of the most astonishing feats of ancient engineering ever discovered. Each plank interlocked perfectly, allowing flexibility without cracking. Modern marine engineers noted the design mirrors Scandinavian shipbuilding techniques, yet predates them by 4 millennia. Even more curious, 2 additional sealed boat pits beside the pyramid remain unopened. Fully functional vessels buried underground, engineered with knowledge of physics, mechanics, and motion. Why hide working ships? Why engineer them to be seaworthy if they were merely ritual objects? The pattern continues with smaller objects. Buried in the Metropolitan Museum of Art lies a modest wooden statue of Hathor. At first glance, it seems ordinary, but X-rays reveal a concealed mechanical axis running through the torso to the arm. Manipulate it, and the arm rises and falls, an automaton hidden within devotional wood. This is no accident. It demonstrates intentional mechanical design, a mastery of motion, force, and precision in the Bronze Age. Tombs themselves contain similar engineering marvels. Royal burials feature automatic sealing systems, sliding granite blocks, gravity-triggered portcullises, counterweights, and grooves designed to lock chambers permanently after burial. The Great Pyramid alone contains a granite portcullis system of 3 60-ton blocks, engineered to drop into place with perfect precision. These are not symbolic features, they are functioning machines, built to seal, secure, and protect. Even beyond tombs, ritual objects exhibit behavior more akin to scientific instruments than art or worship. Egypt's engineering, embedded in religion, demonstrates that these ancient people understood mechanics, materials, and precision at levels far beyond what the surviving texts suggest. And whenever knowledge was threatened by political collapse, religious reform, or societal upheaval, Egypt turned to these engineered objects, just as it had with ritual animals, as instruments of control, containment, and secrecy. Sirens vibrate at specific resonant frequencies. Water clocks measure time through controlled flow and calibrated markers. Niometers use hydraulic readings to predict the Nile's floods. Temple alignment tools track the sun and stars with uncanny precision. Each instrument demands mathematics, material science, and measurement skills, and each appears most prominently during periods of upheaval, when Egypt's political and religious order faltered. The pattern is unmistakable. The The solar boat emerges as the Old Kingdom collapses. The Hathor mechanism surfaces amid Middle Kingdom instability. Portcullis systems and tomb-engineered defenses rise with New Kingdom turbulence. Water clocks and hydraulic devices flourish during environmental stress. Ritual mechanisms appear following Akhenaten's religious revolution. Over and over, when Egypt faces threat or chaos, its technology spikes. And as soon as stability returns, the tools vanish, hidden or restricted, accessible only to a select elite. Royal engineers, astronomer priests, and medical specialists who left almost no written record. When we assemble this chapter's evidence alongside everything uncovered previously, erased medical texts, missing bodies, reused burial goods, altered masks, experimental mummification, ritual animals, the granite giants of the Serapeum, a single unnerving question emerges. What were they preparing for? What force, event, or danger was so significant that Egypt's most guarded knowledge appeared only during instability, only to vanish again, buried beneath the sand? To understand, we must step back from a single artifact or tomb and observe the full 4,000-year pattern binding these mysteries together. From vanished physicians and erased inscriptions to rushed royal burials, engineered granite sarcophagi, experimental mummification, mass cemeteries, ritual animals, and mechanical artifacts, a single truth emerges with startling clarity. Egypt was not merely a civilization of monuments. It was a civilization that curated knowledge, managed it, restricted it, and erased it when necessary. Over 4 millennia, every anomaly points to the same conclusion. Egypt did not simply lose parts of its history. It removed them. The evidence is consistent. Key individuals tied to specialized knowledge disappear without explanation. Teddy Nebu, the royal physician with rare titles and access to powerful medical secrets, was buried in a finely carved tomb, but his body is missing. Priests linked to venom rituals vanish. Officials associated with forbidden practices have their names chiseled out, their stories excised stone by stone. Whenever knowledge became sensitive, dangerous, or politically volatile, those who carried it were quietly erased from the record. The same surgical precision appears in the texts. Tomb inscriptions describing medical formulas, toxin rituals, protection spells, and politically charged names were deliberately carved away. Clean, targeted, precise. They were not weathered or eroded. Entire branches of knowledge were removed from historical memory. The timing aligns with periods of crisis. The Old Kingdom's collapse, the Amarna Revolution, the New Kingdom's decline, moments when ideological control was crucial for survival. Burials echo the same story. Tutankhamun's tomb was hastily constructed and reused. Thutmose II's burial was evacuated. High-status officials were interred in repurposed coffins or rooms. Tombs were sealed, altered, or dismantled entirely. The headless pyramid, stripped of stones, inscriptions, and identity, illustrates the same pattern. These disruptions are not random. They coincide with historical windows marked by instability, priestly conflict, environmental stress, or radical religious reform. And then there is engineering. Whenever Egypt's political structure weakened, its most precise and advanced artifacts appear. Knowledge previously hidden suddenly resurfacing. The interlocking timbers of Khufu's solar boat. Granite sarcophagi of the Serapeum, carved with machining-level accuracy. Hidden mechanical joints in ritual statues. Automatic sealing systems in tombs. Water clocks, niometers, astronomical tools, all emerge in bursts, then vanish. This is not gradual technological evolution. It is restricted tradition. Knowledge held by elite groups, revealed only when necessary, then concealed once more. Even the dead themselves reflect this secrecy. Every mummy, every coffin, every carefully engineered object tells the same story. Egypt's greatest power lay not in stone or sand, but in its ability to control knowledge and to decide what the world could and could not remember. CT scans reveal medical procedures that are astonishingly advanced, thousands of years ahead of their time. Bones realigned with precision, tumors examined, jaws reconstructed, spines reinforced, teeth wired with metals. Some mummies even contain objects placed within them for purposes no surviving texts ever explain. Others show signs of chemical experimentation, anatomical modification, or selective preservation techniques that challenge everything we thought we knew about Bronze Age medicine. Beyond the royal tombs, the evidence grows more staggering. Mass cemeteries hold hundreds of thousands, perhaps 1 million, intentionally preserved bodies from people with no elite status. Techniques are inconsistent with official mummification. Improvised methods, experimental treatments, adaptations made in crisis, practices Egypt never recorded. Layer by layer, the pattern emerges. Egypt responds to instability by sealing knowledge away, erasing names, hiding rituals, dismantling pyramids, burying objects deep beneath the desert, removing entire chapters of its own history. Which brings us to the ultimate question, one no archaeologist can answer with certainty, the question that every discovery so far points toward. What was Egypt trying to protect? Was it dangerous medical knowledge, poisons, venoms, antidotes, preservation chemistry, so potent later generations feared its misuse? Was it a forbidden religious system, secret rituals tied to hidden cults, or hybrid deities whose influence threatened political authority? Was it a lineage of engineers and specialists capable of crafting objects, mechanisms, and technologies far beyond the reach of ordinary craftsmen? Or was it a catastrophe? A famine, epidemic, or societal collapse so severe that the priesthood sought to erase it entirely? Or perhaps it is still hidden beneath the sand. Radar scans hint at undiscovered chambers, lost pyramids swallowed by shifting dunes, entire cities yet to be excavated, anomalies lurking beneath the Valley of the Kings, and over 90% of Egypt's ruins still underground. Egypt did not lose its secrets. They were buried, meticulously, deliberately, repeatedly. The desert is not empty. It is an archive, meant to remain sealed. After tracing the evidence through 11 chapters, a chilling realization comes into focus. Egypt was not only a civilization that built monuments. It was a civilization that controlled knowledge. When information became dangerous, destabilizing, or inconvenient, Egypt did not destroy it. It hid it beneath temples, tombs, pyramids, and entire mountains of sand. What we've uncovered so far, the missing doctor, the erased texts, the rushed burials, the hidden chambers, the engineered granite boxes, the experimental mummification, is only what escaped the priesthood's control. And that brings us to the final, unavoidable question. If this is what we find in the first few meters of sand, what lies beneath the next 100? Egypt knows. The desert knows. And one day, whether by accident, excavation, or shifting dunes, the truth buried beneath the sands will rise again. And before we continue this journey into the forgotten world, don't forget to like this video, share it with someone who loves ancient mysteries, and subscribe so you never miss what we uncover next. Your support keeps these stories alive, and there are many more waiting, still hidden beneath the sand.